Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, no problem.
So first, what are ticks?
Ticks are an external parasite. There's quite a number of species. Um, they feed on a blood meal on mammals usually, um, but they're quite a number of species out there.
How small are ticks?
Normal tick starts out very, very small. It's hard to see with your naked eye, but as time goes on, after it attaches to an animal and starts to engorge and feed for a while, it can actually get quite big. Probably almost as big as the end of your thumb.
How do ticks most commonly gain access to a human's body or a pet's body?
Usually when either an animal or person is walking through the bush, ticks generally are on the vegetation. They kind of migrate up the vegetation, and as the animal or a person's walking through, it latches on and then grabs on. It'll crawl up, and then it actually sticks its head or mouth parts in the skin quite firmly, and that's where it'll stay attached for some time and start to feed and engorge itself with blood.
What are some of the dangers of ticks? What can they do to you?
I guess there's a number of risks. One is just transmitting bacterial diseases. So there's a number of diseases that could potentially be transmitted. Probably the biggest concern is Lyme disease. There's also conditions where there's a toxin in the tick that potentially can get into the bloodstream and cause like a paralysis in dogs. But we don't see that commonly. But probably the biggest concern is the transfer of Lyme disease.
How bad are ticks this year in comparison to other years?
Over the last few years, we're definitely seeing more ticks on pets. Years ago, we maybe saw them occasionally on the odd cow, cattle, wildlife, and moose and elk. Rarely would we see them on a dog or a cat. Now it's very common. So yeah, they're becoming much more prevalent for sure over the last few years.
Do you have an idea as to why that is?
That's a good question. People blame it on climate change. I think environments don't stay static.
Mhm.
There's always a migration of animals and species and stuff. So, it's probably a number of contributing factors to that.
Where are ticks usually found when they're attached to the body?
Yeah, I mean, it could be anywhere. Obviously, if they're on the vegetation, as the animal's running through the bush and the vegetation, the lower extremities. We just had a cat in the other day. We found one on its forehead. So wherever the animal is exposed when it's running through the vegetation, it'll pick up a tick.
How do you find ticks on the body once they're attached?
You can, if you pet the animal and part the hair, if it's very, very small, it's hard to see. But they're noticeable if you're an observant owner and you're petting the owner or petting the dog. You can find a tick, especially as it gets a bit larger.
How can ticks be prevented or, in the worst case, treated?
What we recommend, there's a surveillance program now in Alberta that's been in place for probably 10, 12 years. So if you do happen to find a tick on your pet, you can gently take it off and bring it in, or the vet clinic for you. And the program now, we used to have to send them in and they would determine the species of the tick. And then if it was a tick that potentially could carry disease. Now it's much simpler. We take the tick and we'll take a picture, send a picture of it online, and if it's not the species that is of concern, then we don't submit it. So you can either take the tick off yourself or bring the pet in, we'll take it off for you. Probably the big thing is limiting exposure, and just being diligent in checking yourself after you're in a place where potentially you can pick up ticks. We have the good thing with pets is there's a many different combination products that are very effective for the prevention of ticks. And if you start those early in the spring, that really limits the exposure to your pet for ticks. So there's a lot of good products out there now. If you start early in the spring, that really prevents your animal or your pet from getting ticks.
Thanks so much for joining me, Craig. And once again, taking the time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no trouble. Glad to do it for you.